send it live on YouTube.
Okay, I'm going to read my introduction, David.
Okay.
Happy New Year, Merry Christmas, everybody. And David's telling me I'm being recorded. Okay.
Yes, you are being recorded.
Under RSA 91A2:2, Roman numeral 3, B in parentheses, the chair is waiving the requirement of a quorum at the physical location of the meeting. Whereas in order to ensure an uninterrupted flow of federal transportation funding to the region, the RPC must act on Amendment 2 to the Transportation Improvement Program. Whereas the RPC chair has decided that immediate action is imperative and the physical presence of a quorum is not reasonably practical within the period of time requiring action due to the ongoing pandemic. Therefore, the RPC will invoke this emergency provision and waive requirement of a quorum at the physical location of the meeting. David, would you be kind enough to introduce everybody?
Yes. All right. Thank you, Richard. So in the meeting today, we have Richard McDermott
Here.
from Hampton Falls, Danya Siegley from Rye,
Here. Mhm.
Paul Maloney from Federal Highway Administration.
Here, good morning.
Good morning, Paul. Lucy St. John from NHDOT.
Morning, everyone.
Jennifer Hale from Hampton.
Good morning, everyone.
Morning, Jennifer.
Rad Nichols from Coast.
Morning.
Tim White from New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services.
Yes, good morning.
Peter Coffin from Kingston.
Hi.
And then also we have Chris Cross here from Newington in the room with us. And then Scott Bogle and myself, Dave Walker here in the room. And then Annette Pettengill also from RPC, connecting remotely from the safety of our office. So, did I miss anybody? I got everybody.
Think you're okay?
Yeah. The listing on the screen keeps shifting around, so it's really hard to use that as a tool. So
All right,
okay.
Can we approve the minutes of 10:28 and 12:2?
Yeah, this is Peter Coffin. I'll move that we approve the minutes of October 28th and November 2nd. Sorry, December 2nd.
December
I have
2nd.
here. Yeah, and I understand we need to do that by roll call, so
Correct.
I'll just say I vote yes.
Thank you, Peter.
I'll second that.
All right, thank you, Rad.
Thank you, Rad.
Yeah.
Go ahead,
Okay,
David, you
so-
want to do the roll call?
All right, I will do the roll call. 1 second, let's see. So Peter already said yes, so we'll call that he was the first. Richard.
Yes.
All right. Chris.
Non-voting.
Non-voting. Okay, that's right. Jen Hale.
Unmute, and that's a yes.
All right, thank you. Danya.
Yes.
All right, thank you. Paul is non-voting member. Rad.
Yes.
All right, thank you, Rad. Tim.
Yes.
All right, Lucy.
Yes.
And I think that's everybody. Oh, we got Mark joining us from Stratum. So, all right. So I feel he's going to want to vote on that or not, but give him 1 second. Morning, Mark.
Good morning, sorry I'm late.
Oh, that's all right. You're just in time to vote on the minutes. If you
Okay,
want.
we'll vote to approve the minute.
All right, thank you. All right, so I think that's everything. Minutes are approved.
I think you're okay. Everybody's in. The next one on the agenda is the tip amendment number 3, attachment 2.
Right.
David, will you address that?
Yes, I will. I am going to share a presentation. Run us through that real quick. We'll see about how real quick it is, but that'll be the attempt.
Dave,
Yes.
since I'm the only one here, if you and Scott, you want to pick up your mask for the presentation, no problem.
Okay. All right. All right.
Now,
Thanks.
What's your useful style?
Well, you know, I've been doing both lately, so. So, okay. Let's see. Oh, what happened? Oh, there we are. Can everybody see the presentation?
Sure.
Yes.
Yes, okay. All right, so disadvantage is that we can't see any of the people who are in the meeting at the moment. So, okay, so we have TIP Amendment 3 in front of us for the 2021 to 2024 Transportation Improvement Program. So I'm going to run maybe through this. So this is just the general overview slide that I usually include on this, talking about how the TIP and the plan and the state 10-year plan work together to move projects from concepts to construction. I'm not going to go into any real detail here. So the TIP amendment process generally occurs about quarterly, and we're dealing with substantial changes to the project scope, cost, or schedule of projects. And the process, it begins with DOT providing a draft amendment that is reviewed and endorsed through the interagency consultation process. So all the RPCs and MPOs and federal agencies get a quick look at it ahead of putting it out for general public approval to try to make sure that everybody understands what changes are being proposed. We then add that to our database and process it through that, and then start somewhere between the 10 and 30-day comment period, depending on the number of projects being proposed for revision, the complexity of the revisions, the potential, if some of the projects that are being proposed are controversial, that kind of thing, we might do a longer public comment period versus a shorter one. We then bring the revision to the TAC for approval, and then they send a recommendation to the MPO Policy Committee, and then the Policy Committee approves the amendment after the end of the comment period at a public hearing, and we then send that approval to NHDOT, who collects all the approvals from the regions, makes a statewide approval, and sends that to Federal Highways for final approvals, and at which point all of the amendments are considered in place. So for Amendment 3, there are 7 regional projects that we're talking about making revisions to, and then 5 statewide projects as well. We're starting a comment period on that today that will extend from today out to actually February 8th, which is the day before the MPO Policy Committee on the 9th. Some pretty big funding changes occurring with this amendment. It's about adding about almost $68 million to the TIP. And then the net funding in the long range plan. So if you consider years out beyond the TIP, we're adding almost $100 million. I'm going to sort of go through some of that right now. So there are 5 projects that are receiving additional funding. So the first one is the sort of remaining work occurring on the replacement of the Sarah Long Bridge. And the bridge is done, but this is related to the work around the Port of New Hampshire that was sort of required by that project and necessary due to some of the changes that the bridge made to port properties. So there's some pretty extensive work going on at the port and around the port for that. and some additional funding is being added to that. The statewide, or I'm sure say the statewide MOBRR program, that's the municipally owned bridge rehab and replacement program. We're seeing an increase of about $6 million in the tip to accommodate changes to individual projects. This is remember, these statewide projects or programs are collections of individual projects that don't need to be listed separately in the tip. So adding about 6.4 million in the tip and about $41 million overall. A lot of this money, a lot of these additional funds are coming through due to the infrastructure bill that was passed recently, adding in a lot more funding into the process. And so you're going to see in the out years, we're seeing a lot of additional funding around some of these programmatics. The statewide culvert replacement, rehabilitation and drainage repairs program. So again, this is very similar to the statewide MOBRR program in that there's some changes to individual projects within that and some additional funds coming in and that's what's requiring the additional funding for this program. The statewide FTA 5307, this is the Boston urbanized area transit funds, or a portion to New Hampshire Department of Transportation. And this is increasing funds, and this is entirely due to additional funding in the American Rescue Plan and carry over from fiscal year 21 into fiscal year 22. So it's adding about $10.7 million into the plan or into the tip. Longer term, there's additional funding that's coming in as well. And finally, on this page, the Seabrook Hampton Bridge. This is the bridge on Route 1A between, it's actually entirely in Hampton, but over Hampton Harbor. So it's the reconstruction of that bridge that's been in the works for a little while now and is moving steadily towards construction. There's some additional, basically the project is being accelerated in terms of funding and it being sort of more front loaded than it was. And so that's pulling some additional money into the tip that was actually scheduled outside of the tip years like 2025 and 2026, which is why the total cost change is only about $5 million, but it's because some of that money was, that 31.6 million was in 2025 and 2026, and it's moving into the tip years, so into 2023 and 2024. The additional funding from the infrastructure bill means that the state no longer has to bond this project. So it's changing from bond funds to federal funds and accelerating the construction date, and still accelerating the construction timeframe. So there are a number of projects here that have timing changes, and these are all like CMAQ and TAP projects. So these are all local projects. Right, and essentially what's happening for all 5 of these is that construction is getting moved out of the tip years into later on. So we have the first project is right turn lane on New Hampshire Avenue and Arboretum Drive in Peace Trayport. The second project is the Elwyn Road bike path or multi-use path in Portsmouth. Third project, the last 3 projects are Salem projects. One is the bike head trail, adding a short section to that. Second one is their ITS project that was, I believe, approved maybe 2 rounds ago to identify and update signal coordination at 28 of their signalized intersections. And then the last one in Salem is another portion of the rail trail. And so you can see I've sort of highlighted when these are all moving to. Many of them are moving to just outside of the tip, but the last section of the rail trail there at the bottom is actually moving pretty far out to 2029. And these all reflect, excuse me, the current project schedules and how the project is programmed in the state tenure plan. my expectation is that as these projects move through the engineering phase, and assuming that they meet timetables for engineering work, they may be able to move the construction back up a bit. But I think what's been happening with a lot of these local projects is that the things keep getting delayed and delayed and delayed because the engineering and the right-of-way work doesn't get done. And so I think the approach is maybe pushing off the construction a little bit until the engineering is done. And then you can program the move the program up through an amendment or a revision, that kind of thing. So, and I think some of this is also fiscally constraint related.
Is there a lot of lack of local community funds, Dave, you feel, or is it the availability of local engineering talent that's become very expensive and rare?
I think probably it's a little bit of each. And I know some of it is just the federal process is very challenging for a lot of communities to implement. And so that tends to stretch the time that the engineering takes. And so I think this is sort of a reaction to that, to try to give some more time without having to keep delaying the construction on these projects. And if people can meet those timeframes, then maybe things can move up. And I think that's I think the approach that's being taken here. Finally, you know, basically because only the construction was programmed for that last Salem project, that last section of the rail trail, in essence, the entirety of that project is moving out of the tip. So it's being moved out of the tip. It's not going away. It's just being delayed for a few years.
Was there discussion of why such a long delay in interagency?
No, there was not.
Okay.
Yes. So there are also two projects. These are the final two projects that we'll talk about, where it's just scope only changes, no changes to time frame or anything like that. It's just some changes to the description. The statewide 41756, which originally used to say to evaluate 61 plus traffic control signals, has been sort of adjusted to get rid of that number of traffic control signals, to, I guess, allow for some variation in that. And then for the statewide complex bridge inspections, it's just updating the fiscal year range that's covered under that, so to the current one. From air quality conformity perspective, we've been in attainment now since 2013, and we can rely on our existing analysis for that, so we don't have to address that really. Fiscal constraint is maintained. We are seeing a large sort of balance of funds available, and that's basically, I think, caused due to the recent sort of infusion of money from the American Rescue Plan and the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, and that, so that I think you'll see in 2021 there's a pretty big amount of funds that's sort of remaining to be programmed. That will go away over time as DOT starts to adjust and having that funding available. And that's some of that's what we're seeing today is some of the money moving into that, but there's still some other funds that'll be coming through and projects that'll be adjusted to try to take advantage of that. Eventually what we need today this morning is a recommendation of approval for TIP Amendment 3 that we can send to the MPO Policy Committee for their approval. I'm going to stop sharing the screen at this point, just so that I can see people who might have questions. So I'm going to attempt to do that. Okay. So did anybody have questions about any of the projects that are being revised?
Or forever hold your peace.
Yeah. Like I said, we are starting the comment period. So if there are questions that you come up with after this meeting, you know, you certainly can submit a formal comment. or you can certainly reach out at any time to me after the meeting if you had a particular question about a project.
Is there a time frame, David?
Well, this comment period starts today and ends on February 8th. And the MPO meeting is on the 9th, where the final approval for our portion of this process is. So, you know, any comments you might have would need to be submitted before the 8th, so that they could be incorporated into discussion at the commission meeting on the 9th.
Okay. Any questions, anybody? Going once, going twice? Okay. Can we move?
Okay.
Want to move?
Get a motion to recommend approval of Amendment 3 to the MPO Policy Committee.
I make that motion.
All right, thank you, Rad.
We have a second.
Second.
Mark, thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Mark.
Okay, I'm going to go through the list again
Roll call.
for roll call. Yep. Richard McDermott.
Yes, sir. Yes.
All right. Chris, you're not voting. Jennifer Hale.
Yes.
All right, thank you. Danya.
Yes.
Thank you, Danya. Let's see, Peter. Did we lose Peter? We lost Peter. All right. We'll skip him for now. Rad.
Yes.
All right, thank you, Rad. Tim.
Yes.
Tim. Lucy.
Yes.
All right, thank you. And Mark.
Yes.
All right, thank you, Mark. Is that everybody? Did I get everybody? I think I might have.
Is everybody on the screen?
Did I miss anybody? It's a voting man. Finding it challenging to keep track of these things today. Okay, all right. All right, so thank you. Tip Amendment 3 has been approved by the TAC.
Okay.
And as I said, we'll be taking this to the.
Number 4, the Highway Safety Improvement Program,
All right,
2022 Performance Targets, Attachment 3, motion required. Dave Walker.
all right, yep, I'm gonna share the screen again. Maybe, there we are. All right, can everybody see the presentation again?
Yes.
Yes.
All right, thank you. Okay, so those of you that have been on the TAC for a bit, this is going to look very familiar. This is, I think, the 4th or 5th year in a row that we've been doing Highway Safety Improvement Program performance targets. Very similar to previous years, and I'm going to run through that. So the MAP 21 and FAST Acts mandated that federal highways develop a rule for safety performance measures and targets, and that rule, it attempts to tie together performance management strategies and targets for 3 different things: the New Hampshire Department of Transportation's Highway Safety Improvement Program, the New Hampshire DOT Strategic Highway Safety Plan, and the New Hampshire Office of Highway Safety Plan, which is within, that office was in the Department of Safety. So those 3 things, these performance targets try to tie those 3 things together. The state is required to coordinate with each of the 4 MPOs in the state to establish required targets. And as the MPO, we have the option to establish our own targets or to vote to sort of support the statewide targets as they exist. And these safety funds and these targets apply to all roads, not just the state highways. So there are 5 target areas covered with these performance targets: the number of fatalities, the rate of fatalities, the number of serious injuries, the rate of serious injuries, and then the total non-motorized fatalities and serious injuries. The state has to establish these targets by the end of August every year. And then from that point, the MPOs have 180 days to establish their targets, which roughly translates to the end of February. We can, as I said, establish our own targets or vote to support the statewide targets. And we can also expand the targets that we're looking at beyond those 5 required areas. And we have for a number of years. We've talked about, we have a target for the number of motorcycle fatalities that are occurring in the region. So the target setting process, just briefly go through this. The number targets are a 5-year rolling average number. So basically you add the number for each of the most recent 5 years together, divide by 5 and round to the 10th decimal place and you get the number. When we talk about the rates, those are all based on the rate per 100 million vehicle miles of travel. And so you take all those numbers and divide them by the vehicle miles of travel per year, and you get the average fatality rate per 100 million vehicle miles travel. 100 million VMT is how we'll call it.
Excuse me, David.
Yeah.
All I've got is the cover sheet, Highway Safety Improvement Program.
Oh, not seeing anything going forward. All right.
I mean, I've
Is
seen it
anybody
before,
else
but I'm
seeing
just-
just that?
That's what I see as well.
Huh,
Same.
interesting. All right.
Yep.
Let me,
There you go.
Much
Oh.
better.
That's
oh, is
better.
it moving now?
Yes.
Okay. So you should see a screen that says fatalities with a table on one side and 2 charts on the other side. Is that what
Correct,
everybody's seeing?
yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
That's very odd that it was so delayed. I don't know if you need me to go back through some of the things that I was saying before, or is everybody okay with just keep moving forward?
Would you mind just
We thought
showing
we
the
were-
slides briefly?
Okay.
There you
So, all right. So the 3 talked about how this is the coordination of the 3 plans. I did load these these presentations up on the website. So on the TAC page on the RPC website, you can see PDFs of these, both this and the TIP amendment presentation. We'll also add Scott's up there after the meeting. So 5 target areas and the timeframes for which we need to have the targets in place, and also our option to add any additional targets that we find important. In this case, we have added the motorcycle fatalities as one. The 2 different ways that we set the targets, with the number targets being a 5-year rolling average, and then the rate targets being that same 5-year average, but also putting it per 100 million vehicle miles traveled. Okay, so fatalities. So on the left side of the screen is a table that shows the number of fatalities each year, both in the state of New Hampshire as well as in the MPO region, with the most recent data that we're using at the bottom. So 2020 is at the bottom. Adjacent to that is the 5-year average. So we have the 5-year period, as well as the New Hampshire average during that time, the 5-year average, and then the MPO region 5-year average. The charts on the right side at the top shows the statewide. Blue bars show the annual total. The dashed red line shows the projected trend with the target set out at the end. And then the solid red line shows the 5-year average for each of those years. And that gives you just an idea of the trends that we're seeing and the pattern, I guess, as it is. The chart on the bottom of the screen below that is the same exact thing except for the MPO region. So, and all the next 5 charts are set up, and 5 or 6 charts are set up almost exactly the same way each time. So we can see that statewide in 2020, there was actually a slight increase in the number of fatalities over 2019 statewide. In the region, we had fewer than we had had in 2019. And what this is doing is it basically keeps the statewide average kind of flat. So we're seeing that be kind of flat going forward. And on the regional level, we're seeing a continued decline in our trending downward in the number of fatalities in the region.
David, can you increase the size of these, left to right? And or
Don't know. I don't
So
know.
Dave,
that I can.
hey, Dave, we see your like the notes presentation.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
No, that's all right.
Didn't realize that. Hold on one second. I need my glasses. Gotta go to the laptop. Okay. All right, how's that? Is that better?
I don't see a change. Oh, now it is. Yep.
there's a
All
change.
right.
Yeah.
Just seems to be taking a minute to process through. Sorry, I didn't realize that it had done that. I can't see the laptop screen while I'm doing this. So
There are no top secret notes, Dave. So
I never do notes for these presentations, so
They're called crib notes.
yeah. All right, I'm gonna just hide the thumbnail here. Okay, so everybody can see that a little better now?
Yes.
All right,
Yeah, that's
So-
perfect. Perfect.
okay, good. All right. Moving on to the fatality rate. Again, this is set up the exact same way as the last slide. The table on the left side, again, we have the amount of travel that's happening in the state. So that in 2020, 119.7 million vehicle miles of travel. So a lot of travel, but substantially less in 2020 than in 2019 due to COVID-19 pandemic. There was a lot less travel occurring. We saw a similar reduction at the regional level, so only 20.33 million vehicle miles of travel. And what that has done in at least the statewide, when you have an increase in fatalities and a reduction in travel, it means your fatality rate goes up. So at the statewide level, the fatality rate has gone up. At the local regional level, the fatality rate has actually continued to go down, given that we had fewer fatalities despite the lower amount of travel going on. So then on the right side of that table are the 5-year averages for those two rates. And so you can see once again, the state fatality rate is pretty flat. It just had a very slight decline in the 5-year average, and the regional had a slightly bigger decline there. And so you can see that in the tables, or I mean in the charts on the right side, where the trend line is pretty steady at the state level at the top there in that dashed line. And the 5-year averages are pretty steady as well. At the regional level, we can see that it would again have that sort of steeper decline anticipated as we sort of move forward in time. Serious injuries. A higher number of serious injuries at the state level in 2020. 512 versus 485 in 2019. At the regional level, we actually continued to go down from 2019, so down to 60 serious injuries versus 67. Then 5-year averages, the 5-year average at the state level went up slightly and continued our sort of downward trend at the regional level. And you can see those reflected again in the charts on the right side, where the state trend in the dashed line is pretty flat. It is declining slightly, but it's pretty flat overall, with the most recent year a little bit of an uptick from 2019. And then on the regional level on the bottom chart, a very, very steep decline in those over time, I can't imagine that's sustainable, but it is what's predicted at this point. Rate of
David?
serious injuries? Yes.
Sorry, just a quick question. I know a lot of data that states collect. Their reported 2020 reporting reflects 2019 data. There's usually a year delay in a lot of cumulative data like that. Can you just give me an idea? I'm not very familiar with the safety side of things in terms of reporting. When will the 2021 data be reported? Do you know that?
We should start to, I mean, that gets collected at the state level. And they're working on that 2021 data now. But we won't, and so like DOT will see it probably, I would guess, late spring, early summer, because they'll have to set the 2023 targets this
Right.
summer. So they'll see that info. I would guess at some point later this spring, maybe early summer, and we'll see it at some point after that. So.
Okay, so in the coming month, we should see something like that in, say, around summertime, I suppose. Is that?
Yeah, I would guess, yeah, the state will start discussing the 2023 targets sort of openly in the summer, because they'll have to approve them by the end of August.
Right, yeah.
And the current data collection system in New Hampshire is sort of a combination of some police organizations have electronic submittal, many do not. And so it has to be sort of collected and collated and entered into the system at the state level. So that just takes some time.
All right, thank you.
Sure.
Lucy, do you have a question?
No, I didn't have a question. I was just going to say I can inquire in terms of specifics, but I think Dave gave a general overview. I don't know a date of when anything specifically is available, but I can further inquire about that.
I was just curious, honestly. I haven't followed the safety reporting as closely as our safety engineer in the office, but seeing the 2021 and 2022 dates there, but no data, that just made me think, hey, when do we see that? You know, but
Yeah,
that's fine. I mean, I'm fine with like late spring, sometime summer. I'm just curious. Thank you.
yeah. There have been some delays due to COVID, like the NHTSA's, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, has their fatal accident record system, FARS system. And we haven't seen 2020 data from that yet, which is really unusual. Usually that's the first data we get is that. So we had to use the state data to do this year instead of using the FARS data. So, you know, there have been some delays to that, but we're hopeful that things will start to catch up again. Okay, let's see, we talked about serious injuries. Hopefully rate of serious injuries. Yeah. That's what we need to talk about. So similar to the rate of fatalities, with the same setup, with the amount of travel occurring in both the state level and the regional level on the left side of the table, and the adjusted serious injury rates for the state and the region below that. And I neglected to highlight them, but as we see, given the lower amount of travel and the higher number of injuries, the serious injury rate jumped quite a bit at the state level from 3.5 serious injuries per 100 million VMT to almost 4.3 serious injuries per 100 million VMT. And we actually jumped a little bit at the regional level too, from 2.8 to 2.9. 5-year averages, the state saw a slight increase from about 3.36 injuries per 100 million VMT to 3.5. So a little bit of a jump there. We continued at the regional level, continued to decrease our rate of serious injuries from and the 5-year average from 3.16 to 2.88. So a slight decline there. And again, the tables, the charts on the right side sort of try to illustrate that. And you see again, a much flatter trend at the statewide level, very steep trend at the regional level, and a little bit of an uptick here at the state for 2020 in terms of the rate of serious injuries versus 2019, and continued decline at the regional level. Non-motorized fatalities and serious injuries. So this is the sum of fatalities and serious injuries for bike pedestrian related crashes. And so those are shown both at the state level in the first three columns. So we have the state fatalities, serious injuries, and the total. So 34 at the state level in 2020. 14 fatalities and 20 serious injuries. At the regional level, we had 1 fatality and 5 serious injuries. So 6 total there. So same total as 2019 for us, although we did have a fatality this year, or 2020 versus none in 2019. 5-year averages on the right side for the state at 49.2 continues a downward trend, and at 6.8 for the RPC region continues that downward trend at all. And those are reflected in the graphs on the right side. Again, see the total numbers continue to decline, and the trends are following that pretty regularly. Regionally, given that we're dealing with very small numbers, the trend isn't quite so consistent, but it is overall putting towards continued downward trend in the number of fatalities and serious injuries for non-motorized travel. There's no rate measure for non-motorized travel because we don't have very good estimates of how much non-motorized travel is occurring. So it's hard for us to understand, what that means in terms of a rate. Finally, we have the motorcycle fatalities. This is an MPO only measure, so the state does not track this as a separate measure, although I do have the state data here. I've reversed this for this particular one. So what's that, Richard?
Is this to wake us up?
Yes. Yeah, keep you on your toes. The one graph, one slide that's different. It's because the state doesn't deal with this one. I decided I would flip the script, get crazy here. So table on the right side shows the total fatalities, motorcycle fatalities at the state level. So 17 in 2020, 3 at the regional level for the MPO region for 2020. And the 5-year averages here on the right side of the table actually see continued decline at the state level, or a slight decline at the state level versus the last 5-year period. At the regional level, we see a little bit of an increase. It just ticked up just a slight bump there. And that's reflected, reflected in the charts on the right side. The statewide level, the trend is pretty steady, slight decline. We can see a slight dip for this most recent 5-year average, and then of course the 2020 fatalities are much fewer than 2019. The regional level, we're seeing really a flat line for the fatalities in the region, and we pretty much vacillate between 1 and 4 every year. And so it's kept a very sort of steady average there. That's a hard one to overcome when you have so few every year. So our trend is pretty steady. Yeah.
Jennifer's asking a question. Am I understanding you right that the state does not track this?
The state does not track this as an individual performance target. No, they are not required by the Federal Highway Administration to do so. And so they are not doing any targets that they're not required to do by the Federal Highway Administration. So
I find that very, very struggling in my head that, motorcycles are not given the same fill in the blank for bicyclists, pedestrians.
Yeah.
I mean, a motorized bike and a bicycle, one gets tracked and one doesn't. I don't know. I just find that very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I think the DOT's policy, and I don't want to speak for DOT necessarily, but I'm going to, I guess, it has been that they're going to do the targets that are required by the federal government and
Right,
not
and
any
it's time.
additional ones. Yeah.
So Dave,
Yeah,
do you mind if I ask a question?
absolutely right.
What, I can't remember what the numbers were for motorized vehicles, but this seems like it's probably a high percentage of total motorized vehicles.
So let's see, we had state level 17. Statewide, there were 104 motor vehicle fatalities.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So it's a fifth, sixth roughly. And so I can't remember what the number was. I can go back a little bit. So 9 at the regional level. So a third of ours in the region were motorcycle fatalities. So that's definitely a big percentage. And so if out of our 9 fatalities, 3 were motorcycles and 1 was a bike or pedestrian. So that's a pretty big share of our regional fatalities are vulnerable road users. So
Yeah.
That's something we should definitely highlight, I think, probably.
Thank you.
David, hold on one second. Peter, did you have a question? Because he lost his connection. Peter?
Here you go. I'm just unmuting. Yeah, no, I'm off video because I didn't have a good, strong connection, but I did not have a question on that. I had just missed the tip amendment
Okay.
voting.
Okay.
That was, well, 5 minutes. I've seen all this and read it, so I was just trying to look back at the handout and was trying to figure out how the VMT was collected. I know I was just reading that section now because I didn't know how much of that was gas, tolls or gas usage or whatever. And I was wondering how reliable the VMT data are.
So the VMT data is based on the traffic volume counts that are collected around the state. And estimates are based on I don't know that it's all the counts that are used, but it's a certain percentage of the counts that are done around the state. And so VMTs are estimated based on that. So it's been roughly the same methodology for at least as long as I've been doing this. So I think it's considered relatively accurate.
Okay, yeah, no, that was I guess the only question I had. I didn't see the reference to the counts because obviously during the COVID situation with fewer people commuting, I didn't know if that had somehow affected the ability to count accurately the total vehicle travel.
No, I don't think so, but there was certainly a lot less travel. And if you,
Right.
Look at the traffic counts from 2020 and now from 2021 that we're seeing, there's definitely a decrease from 2019 and almost across the board, roughly about a 25% decrease in travel. And it was really the early summer of 2020 was pretty, it was probably down 50% or more early on. And I think probably the toll numbers or the daily patterns would give you a really good illustration of how that played out. But there are a few count stations that we have where we get counts every day from, and so we can look at that and you can see how much lower things were. But overall, rather in 2019 we had 138.57 million, 100 million vehicle miles of travel in the state, versus 2020, 119.7 100 million vehicle miles of travel. So that's the first time that number has really gone down, at least since 2009 is as far back as this goes. It generally goes up every year, and for the first time we saw a decline, really, which is unusual. So very different circumstances, I guess.
Right. I remember you mentioned at a meeting before that they were using the same data that people like Google were using for their maps on driving directions. about cell phone tracking and things like that.
Yep.
Is that still incorporated into the VMT?
That's probably not incorporated into this. We use that when we were talking about congestion.
Okay.
We have access to what's, and I cannot recall what the acronym stands for, but it's the NPM RDS, National Performance Management Research Data Set, something like that, which is travel time data on all the state highways for every 5-minute period of every day for the last, since I think 2016, we have that data back to. So we can really track travel times. You can use that data in some, if you have the money to pay the extra cost, you can use that information to get estimates of volume of travel and number of trips and that kind of thing. So
David, Paul's giving you a high five.
all right.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Paul. So I did get that right, I guess. I can never quite remember that really long acronym. So, but that data isn't really incorporated into the performance targets yet, or at least these performance targets on the congestion related performance targets. That is the main source of our data. But for the safety targets, it's really the on the ground counts that are used to sort of create an estimate of the amount of travel occurring in the state.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So, all right. So, all right. Let's see, where are we? We were talking about motorcycle fatalities. So we got through that. Again, so I can see. All right. So the statewide HSIP or Highway Safety Improvement Program targets for calendar year 2021, I actually should say calendar year 2022. I neglected to update that. So we have the 5 statewide targets here, and then the MPO target at the very bottom for motorcycles. So across geez, I just neglected to update the numbers in this, the headers in this table entirely. So for 2020, not 2019, 104 fatalities at the state level, 5-year average of just under 118. The trend-based target actually goes up. It would be a target based on the trend line would be 119.6 fatalities. However, the state and nobody really wants to set a target for fatalities that's higher than what is currently seen. So the target for 2022 at the state level is set at the current 5-year average, which is 117.8. So similarly with the fatality rate, we have the annual rate, the 5-year average, what the target tells us would be the trend, and what the 2022 target will be for the state. So we can go down through each of these. So serious injuries, where the state has set a target of 439.4, which is based on that trend. We see the serious injury rate set a target at 3.22, which is also based on the trend. Non-motorized fatality, a target, or non-motorized fatalities and serious injuries, a target of 38.6, continuing that sort of downward trend that we've seen. And again, these are the 5-year averages, so that's why it doesn't reflect necessarily the number that we saw in 2020. And then at the MPO level, we continue to keep our fatality target at 1. So lower than what we saw in 2020, and hopefully continuing a downward trend. So, and the discussion around these targets has been generally to set sort of achievable targets versus aspirational targets. I mean, clearly our targets for fatalities and serious injuries are 0. We would prefer that there were 0 of each of those things, but in 1 year, it's unlikely that those are achievable targets. And so there's been some debate about that sort of nationally and locally about how we do that, because nobody wants to set a target of 118 fatalities, but that's probably based on the data that we have and the trends that we're seeing and the type of driving that's occurring. That's probably what's more likely to happen than 0. So we have to stick with those reasonable targets.
David, just some grammar. We've got the HSIP targets for calendar year 2021. Is that supposed to be 22?
Yes, it is. I, for whatever reason, decided that I didn't want to update the headers on this slide. So we're stuck a year in the past, but the numbers are all the current numbers. It's
Okay.
just I forgot to update the date values there. So my apologies on that.
You're forgiven.
Thank you. So my recommendation at this point is that the state, or that the RPC supports the statewide targets for the 5 federally required performance measures. So number of fatalities, fatality rate, number of serious injuries, serious injury rate, as well as the number of non-motorized fatalities and serious injuries. And then that we also adopt the MPO only target for motorcycle fatalities. And again, these are going to be considered at the commission meeting on the 9th. There's no sort of public comment period or anything like that that goes with any of these. So this is what it is. So I'd be looking for a motion from to approve these targets as sort of stated here.
We have a motion.
Yeah, I'll make a motion. This is Peter, that we support the established HSIP targets and the MPO only targets for motorcycles as presented.
Thanks, Peter.
I'll second that.
Bad second. All in favor?
Well, we got to go through the list again.
Yep.
So let me see. Richard.
Yes, sir.
All right. Jen.
Yes.
All right. Danya.
Yes.
Peter.
Yes.
Brad.
Yes.
Tim.
Yes.
Lucy.
I abstain.
Okay. And then Mark.
Yes.
Okay, I think that's all the voting members we have here today. So thank you. All right. All right. Chris, you had a question?
Yes, as I was reading this last night, my memory kind of failed me, so perhaps you can discuss and refresh it. It's good to know the past data and trends, and setting target goals is good aspirations. I couldn't remember how these 3 plans actually take those targets and kind of drive either funding or project selection to turn them into reality.
Yeah.
Have I forgotten something, or?
No, no,
I think it's hard to do.
it is. So at the state level, the HSIP targets are sort of they're done in concert with the HSIP funding program. So the state gets roughly $9 or $10 million a year in funding that has to be dedicated towards making safety improvements. If the state is not making adequate progress on meeting the safety targets that they've set, then Federal Highways says all that money has to be spent on safety targets. And I believe there's another planning requirement that goes into effect there too, but I can't recall exactly. Maybe Paul or Lucy might have some insight on that. So typically New Hampshire spends all of the HSIP money on safety improvements. But I believe there was actually maybe last year, the first assessment as to whether they're making adequate progress, and it was found that they weren't making adequate progress on all those performance measures. So by requirement now, they have to spend all HSIP money on safety improvements. Is it enough? Probably not. I mean, it probably should be. We should probably be driving 50% of our funding towards safety improvements, but it's a challenge because I think what we found is that the locations of the fatalities tends to be random. You know, there's not, I don't know, back 20, 30, 40 years ago, there was always that one place or a couple places around that were dangerous, right? I think a lot of those have been engineered out of the system now and rebuilt and designed in more modern ways. So fatalities tend to occur more when people aren't wearing their seatbelts or a helmet or are driving excessively fast, those kinds of things. So it's the human behaviors that are causing the fatalities as opposed to the system itself. And so there's sort of this disconnect between the way the funding is and where the crashes are occurring. And so where a crash occurs, it may be a fatality, and that may be the only fatality that's happened there in 20 years. But you're sort of, there's a lot of pressure to address those sites because a fatal crash occurred there. What can we do to improve the safety? So I think DOT has also shifted their approach in more recent years, and Scott's sitting on the Hsip committee right now, and I'm sure he has stuff to add to this. And also, I think looking at the state highway safety plan or strategic highway safety plan. But I think there's a more of a look at the systemic and systematic approaches that DOT can and the state can make to improve the safety of the system. You know, things like looking at speed limits, things like looking at making sure shoulders are in place, you know, addressing acute angle intersections where it's, you know, as opposed to the 90-degree angle intersections, those kind of things. Those kind of things are approaches that are taken, I think. So.
Yeah, I think the other planning requirement that Dave mentioned is that if they're not meeting the targets, DOT has to update the Hsip implementation plan. Okay. I believe on an annual basis until they start meeting that target. And DOT is just completing now an update both to the strategic highway safety plan and to the Hsip implementation plan. And there's been, particularly for the strategic highway safety plan update, there's been a really extensive public process that's gone into that. And some of the recommendations that have gone into that include trying to get better data than we do now. Because, for example, a significant portion of crashes, there is no geolocation that DOT gets from DMV or gets from the Department of Safety. Trying to have better data there, trying to, it's a recommendation for the state to acquire sort of a big data cell phone based data set that would allow tracking of non-motorized trips so that you actually had enough data on bicycle and pedestrian trips that you could add a rate measurement for non-motorized fatalities. Also, an increased emphasis on working with law enforcement to try to ensure that there's greater effort put into identifying driver distraction as a potential contributing factor to crashes, particularly in the case of, say, vulnerable road users, whether motorcycle riders or non-motorized riders. So I think there's been a lot of attention in particular to getting better data so that we can better understand the causes of the crashes, not just the immediate cause of the crash, a run off the road crash or an intersection crash, but what was going on that led the driver to run off the road or to, yeah.
Thank you. Any other HSIP questions? Target questions?
Dave, if I could add something, I would say that I took a look at the performance metrics across the country, and New Hampshire is certainly not alone in not meeting the safety target. So just to give a little bit of context for everyone here, that certainly was a goal to meet that target, but because New Hampshire did not, it's not like they're the DOT and everyone involved are on some bad list. I mean, certainly we want to see those targets met, but there are many other states around the country who are in a similar situation. I think a lot of it goes back to what you've already said. You know, the funding availability and getting the right information, geolocating it, and I think as time goes on, we're going to see fewer and fewer states in that position of not meeting their targets because technology is getting better, information flow is getting better. But I just wanted to lend that context in case that helped anyone.
Right. And I think we're handcuffed here a little bit in New Hampshire too. We could drop our fatality rate pretty substantially, a number of fatalities simply by having seatbelt requirements for all people in the car, helmet law. Helmet law is likely not politically feasible. However, those kinds of things could go a long way to reducing our number of fatalities, but it's not something that we as transportation planning entity or even the state DOT really has any say in or control over. So that's where we're sort of challenging, and I think that's why DOT's approach of looking at the systematic and systemic approaches that they can take to addressing sort of the day-to-day travel and making that safer for everyone, it's going to help us in the long run. And I think if we can figure out ways to reduce speed, that would go a long way too. And I think part of the reason we saw the uptick during 2020 was you have a lot fewer people driving. And so you actually had a lot more speed out there because there was a lot less congestion. And you also had the people who were the least risk averse driving. So you had, people who are, out driving, everybody else is home. Most people are home, but those people who, who want to take chances were out there, and they were able to drive faster because there weren't any other cars on the road. So, so it's interesting. We talk about, congestion being this horrible thing, but in some cases it, does provide some benefits. So I don't know, it's interesting how it's all tying together.
Very thoughtful connection.
Yeah.
Less cars to pass.
Yes. So, all right. I think we're ready to move on to the next topic.
Mr. Bogle, Coordinated Public Transit and Human Services Transportation Plan update for Act Region and Region 8-9. Are you there, Scott?
Yeah, he's
I
here.
am here. Dave's pulling up the presentation for me.
I'm going to hand you the mouse so you can.
Oh, okay, terrific.
Once we get started.
Scott's got his own minion.
So we are beginning and in the middle of, for two different regions, updates to what are called the Coordinated Public Transit Human Service Transportation Plans for two different transit coordination planning regions that we participate in. And I'll talk about those regions in a minute, but this, here we go.
That should work.
Thank
Let me
you.
just make sure. Are you guys seeing the
Full screen.
seeing the right one again?
Full screen.
We're seeing the
No, we're
notes
good.
version.
No, they're not.
Okay, great.
We're seeing the cover. Right, there you go.
Okay, terrific. So these coordinated public transit human service transportation plans are a requirement that actually came in with safety law that was that was passed in 2005, but has been continued through subsequent federal transportation and enabling legislation up through and including the FAST Act and the new IIJA that requires MPOs and rural regional planning commissions to develop these plans as a prerequisite for accessing certain funding streams through Federal Transit Administration. There used to be 3 different funding streams that were under this. 2 of those have subsequently gone away, but the pool of FTA funds that this affects is called Section 5310, which is the FTA pool of funds to support transit access for older adults and people with disabilities. So this, under the federal rule, is ultimately an MPO plan, but in New Hampshire, this work on transit coordination happens not so much by MPO or RPC boundaries, but rather by regional coordination council boundaries. Many of you are familiar with this from prior updates to this plan, but the state in 2006 defined a series of coordination regions. We have participated historically in 2 of those. One of those is Region 10, called the Southeast New Hampshire region. That's the eastern part of the RPC region and all of Stratford Regional Planning Commission. The other that we participated in is Region 9, Greater Derry-Salem region. That is the western part of our region and part of Southern New Hampshire Planning Commission's region. In the past year and a half, that RCC, the Region 9 RCC, has merged with the Greater Manchester RCC. So it's a larger area now. These are to be updated on typically a 5-year basis. The Manchester and Derry-Salem plans were last updated in 2016. The work to update those plans actually started in 2021. We're nearing completion on it now. The Southeast New Hampshire region was last updated in 2017. We're just getting going with an update for that region now and expect to have it later this year. So just looking at those RCC regions, a challenge in New Hampshire is that various regional efforts follow different regional boundaries that have typically no relationship to county boundaries, no relationship to planning commission boundaries. In this case, boundaries were established in part due to hospital catchment areas and really to a range of factors. But one of the 2 plans that we're working on now, and this one is nearing completion, is for the newly joined Region 8 and Region 9 that you see here. And the partners in this include the 2 planning commissions. Providers in that region include Manchester Transit Authority. CART last year merged with the Manchester Transit Authority. So we used to have 2 public transit agencies out there, and they're now administratively 1, although in operating CART service in the communities that CART has historically served, it's continued to be a CART branded service. So you still see CART buses, but administratively, it's all under the umbrella of Manchester Transit Authority now. Other transportation providers out in that region that participate include Easter Seals, Rockingham Nutrition Meals on Wheels program, and then the Caregivers Organization, which operates a volunteer driver program, which is actually under the umbrella of Catholic Charities. Several towns also participate, and then each RCC around the state has at least 1 citizen member to bring sort of a consumer point of view to these planning efforts. Now, the other region you can see here, Region 10, known as the Southeast New Hampshire Regional Coordinating Council, alternately known as the Alliance for Community Transportation, or ACT. The ACT name actually predated the formation of the Regional Coordinating Councils, but that includes, roughly speaking, communities along and to the east of Route 125 in our region, and then all of the Stratford Regional Planning Commission communities, Stratford County up into Southern Carroll County. The participating entities here, 2 regional planning commissions, Coast, again, Rockingham Nutrition Meals on Wheels program, the Ready Rides volunteer program, Community Action Partnership of Stratford County, the regional CAP agency, Transportation Assistance for Seacoast Citizens, they've been less active. Dover Housing Authority also provides transportation in the region, as does Community Partners, and then a citizen member. So the basic federal requirements of these plans, we need to assess transportation needs for populations likely to have unmet transportation needs, in particular, individuals with disabilities, older adults, folks with low income. need to do an inventory of current services, transportation services in the region, and identify service gaps, and then developing strategies to address those gaps. And among those strategies, identifying in particular coordination strategies that can try to reduce any duplication of services, if or where those exist, and other strategies for more efficient use of resources. Some of you have seen this diagram before, but this attempts to show sort of the current inefficiency with how various federal funding streams flow for the provision of transportation services. So think of those boxes, funding agency 1, 2, 3, 4 up on the top row there as, say agency 1 is Federal Transit Administration urban formula funding, which supports fixed route buses. Number 2 could be Federal Transit Administration 5310 funding that supports elderly and disabled transit. Funding 3 might be the Medicaid program through DHHS. Funding 4 might be the Older Americans Act program. All of those different funding streams go to different providers, and individual providers may receive funding from several different programs. And then traditionally, each of them has used that to provide their own services that may be completely isolated from other services. Sort of an idealized model of transit coordination is that you have a lead agency in each region, and funding from each of those funding streams passes through that lead agency, and that lead agency then oversees direct operation of transportation services, contracting with some contracted carriers, working with volunteer drivers, scheduling volunteer trips, perhaps overseeing a taxi voucher program. That said, there's sort of a whole continuum or spectrum of different types of coordination activities that go from really fairly simple to that kind of idealized centralized model that we just looked at on the prior slide. So going from simple strategies at the bottom of the list here, just providing information and referrals. If somebody calls task can't provide a ride, they'll refer them to Meals on Wheels. So they'll refer them to the TripLink call center that Coast operates. Sharing policies and practices, sharing staff resources, sharing vehicles, all the way up to, at the top there, consolidating service under a single agency and or coordinating functions like scheduling and dispatching, where you may have multiple agencies that are operating vehicles, but they all agree to work through a single call center, which is what has happened in the Act Region 10 region. Coast has really been a leader in this regard in the state. So just looking at some landscape changes since 2016, 2017 timeframe when these plans were last updated. There's really been a lot of change in that Region 8, Region 9 area. I noted the merger of CART and MTA. Following the merger of CART and MTA, those two regional coordinating councils also merged. There started to be more work with regional mobility management. Easter Seals has been using some 5310 funding for outreach to other transportation providers, as well as outreach to agencies that schedule trips or try to help clients get transportation, but don't provide transportation themselves, such as hospitals. It's also been really a consolidation of service providers, and kind of the coordination approach that that region has followed has really been one more of consolidation. For example, Rockingham Nutrition Meals on Wheels program in prior years used to operate their own shuttle services that would bring people to meal sites at the Derry Senior Center and London Derry Senior Center. They took a step of coordinating that through CART, such that CART provided those services for them. Now CART has consolidated with MTA, and so MTA is providing CART service and by extension providing that service for Meals on Wheels. In the Southeast New Hampshire region, the approach that's been followed, there's been some consolidation. There's also been this kind of regional brokerage system where Coast has established the TripLink call center. TripLink in turn coordinates scheduling for various Coast operated services, as well as scheduling for the Ready Rides volunteer program, scheduling for Rockingham Nutrition Meals on Wheels program, scheduling now for the Stratford CAP agency. So those agencies operate their own vehicles, but by scheduling through TripLink, one, they can save on the cost of having to pay for those administrative services in-house, but also by having coordinated scheduling, it opens up opportunities to combine clients on vehicles operated by multiple agencies. And so it brings about an opportunity for greater efficiency. Another significant change in the Southeast New Hampshire region has been Coast doing really a full reorganization of its fixed route system in the last year. And then several trends happening statewide. Actually, before I get to the statewide and broader trends, another element that's impacted both regions is that Lamprey Healthcare, which operated in both regions, has stopped providing transportation services 2 years ago now. Some of that has been picked up by Rockingham Nutrition Meals on Wheels, not all of it, and there's still planning around how to address some of those service needs. So, but kind of broader trends impacting transit and community transportation statewide and in some cases nationally. There's a national shortage of commercially licensed drivers, which is having significant impact on Coast, also having impact on these other human service agencies. Coast is actually on its second or third round of service reductions that have been necessitated due to a lack of drivers. And supervisors are being called out for driving. I think RAD is periodically actually needing to do dispatching as the executive director. And similar things are happening with MTA. I know the executive director at MTA is actually out driving on a regular basis due to a lack of drivers. A significant opportunity and change in the landscape that is affecting all of the RCCs is that following the last update to the 10-year transportation plan, because there was a lot of public input on the need for better access to transportation, particularly for seniors and folks with disabilities, DOT agreed to flex or transfer about 25% of the annual allocation of CMAQ funding for transit use, for broader transit use. And that has been divided out such that a share of it is going to the urban transportation providers, a share of it's going to the rural transportation providers, but a share of it is also going to fund mobility management positions in each of the RCC regions. And so this would really bring supplemental staff time to each of those RCC regions for outreach to transportation providers, as well as outreach to, say, healthcare providers that need to get clients to their facilities, but don't currently fund transportation services. So working on broadening the range of stakeholders that are participating in the regional coordinating councils and that are looking at how resources can be better coordinated, how new resources can be mobilized, and also doing public public education with local policymakers on local transportation needs, and trying to ensure that information is more readily available to riders on what services are available. For example, as part of the age-friendly communities work that Southern New Hampshire Planning Commission did, they found that even in communities that had transportation services through CART or through MTA or other agencies, a significant portion of the population wasn't aware of those services. So trying to ensure that there's better information available. And then a last factor, which is a huge factor, is the impact of COVID-19 and short-term implications of that, but also looking at what will be longer-term implications of that in terms of riders' level of comfort riding transit. In the case of volunteer drivers level of comfort continuing to volunteer, because oftentimes volunteers in volunteer driver programs are themselves older adults with medical vulnerabilities. So looking at the elements of the plan updates, essentially survey and outreach is a big piece of this. For the update to the Region 8-9 plan, that's an update that's being done within the UPWP and has been somewhat less resource intensive, somewhat less time available to go into it than the update to the Region 10 Act plan, because we were able to get a separate grant for a staff time, an FTA planning grant to do that update. So for the Region 8-9 plan, that has included a survey of regional transportation providers to get our picture of what services are available in the region now, and also a survey of local welfare officers in each community to get their input on what are unmet needs in the region. There's also a discussion within the RCC membership itself as to unmet needs. For the Region 10 area, the ACT region, in addition to those two surveys I mentioned, there will also be a survey of other human service agencies that may not provide transportation services, but work with populations likely to have unmet needs. We're also looking to do a consumer survey of riders working through different provider agencies in the region, as well as focus groups with older adults, focus groups with individuals with disabilities, as well as outreach with medical providers. The demographic analysis piece is consistent across both regions. This includes looking at various census data, looking at growth in the aging population, looking at trends with population with disabilities, looking at trends in terms of folks with limited English proficiency, and sort of a our Title VI or vulnerable underrepresented populations. Also, as part of this, we look at households that lack vehicles or households that may have multiple workers but only one vehicle available. We look at data on Medicaid enrollments and also TANF enrollments. TANF is Temporary Assistance for Needy Families, which is essentially the federal welfare program. Based on the information that we gather from the provider surveys and the other surveys, we identify service gaps. We're revisiting, updating, and refining the coordination and service expansion strategies from prior plans. At that point, we'll then go out for public comment and MPO adoption. So I noted sort of the distinction here in New Hampshire between, well, from a federal standpoint, these are MPO plans, but functionally they are plans for the RCCs. So we go through a process, and after update and refinement of strategies, the RCCs will vote to endorse the plans. Then we start the public comment process under the MPO, and then the MPO will adopt the plan. But essentially, the RCC in this case functions as the project advisory committee to the MPO, and then we look for MPO adoption. So the timeline on these, we actually expect to bring, I think we'll be looking to complete the Region 9, Region 8-9 plan, and bring it to the MPO likely for adoption in April, such that at the March TAC meeting, March, possibly February TAC meeting, we will have a draft for you to review. And then we go out for our public comment period. For the Region 10 Act plan that we're working on jointly with Stratford Regional Planning Commission, we're really just getting going with that effort currently. And I think we'd be looking for MPO adoption probably at this time next year, by the time we're completed with that process. So at this point, this is just an FYI. We don't have plans for you to review or endorse, but those will be coming fairly soon. So I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Scott, if we endorse this today, does that give you any leverage at all? Does it help your cause?
No, this is just at this point, this is just an update process. We're just getting going, as I said, and either at the February or March TAC meeting, we'll have the draft plan for the Manchester Dairy Salem region for you to review.
Okay.
Stop the share. See people.
Any questions, folks? Don't everybody jump at once now.
Actually, I'd like to ask a question.
Hit it, Paul.
Thank you, Scott, for all that information. It's very informative. Can you speak to equity and inclusiveness, diversity? I mean, are these surveys kind of open in that area, really paying attention to different demographics, making sure that the right people are getting this? I mean, that everybody is getting this, really. Everybody's the right people.
Well, as I said, for Region 9, the surveys included there have been of transportation providers and of local welfare officers. We are expecting to have a broader surveying effort for the Region 10 plan, given that we have additional staff time available through that transit planning grant. We do have good data on populations of color and trends with minority populations in both regions that we've developed in working with the two transit agencies, CART MTA and then Coast, as well as for development of our own Title VI plan. So that includes looking at trends in minority populations, looks at trends in low-income population below the poverty level at the census tract level around the region, and also looking at populations with limited English proficiency. So we have good data in that regard. Historically, these plans have not included those data. But we've been talking about adding that component to the demographic analysis for the plans in this cycle, because we now have better data available in that regard. It's not a bad idea to add. I think it'd actually be quite a good idea. We now have a relationship with Seacoast NAACP and the Racial Unity Team based in Exeter, based on outreach we've done for our Age-Friendly Communities initiative. Conceivably, we could add a focus group discussion with members of those boards. We have plans to have a focus group discussion with those two boards as part of our age-friendly communities initiative. I think rather than having two separate meetings, we would probably ensure we're incorporating transportation questions as part of the meeting that we do with that group for the age-friendly communities initiative.
Okay, thank you.
Does that answer your question?
I think so. It sounds like you're covering all the bases, and I think the only thing at this point to be concerned about are those people who you want to make sure you're getting to, are they participating? And you really can't control that. All you can do is put it out there and hope that they participate.
Peter has a question.
I'll let Brad go. This is more his bailiwick.
Sure. Thank you, Peter. I was just going to say with the new planning emphasis areas and the new, emphasis areas when you're applying for the federal grant funds, certainly we have to begin to incorporate some of those aspects into our plans and studies, so that from an ACTS perspective, I'm the chair of ACTS, so certainly we'll be looking to work with the planning commissions more on that and help provide us with the information and insights that we need.
Nice. Anybody else?
Yeah, I was just going to ask about whether the Afghan refugee resettlement has enough numbers to have any impact on this at all. Obviously, they're not a community of color, but they're don't have driver's licenses and they don't have the English language proficiency, so they fall in those categories. Brad, go ahead.
Yeah, so right now we only know of one family that's been resettled into our region, and we are working to help that family acclimate and use the resources that are available through public transit. So we are we're closely tied into that right now, actually.
Are there more in the pipeline? Right?
That I'm not aware of. I've not heard that there are more in the pipeline, but we have not had that discussion.
I would think so. A friend of ours in Kingston who's signed up to participate got a call asking if she can take a family, and then something changed and they were rooted elsewhere. But I'm getting the impression that we'll see a few more. That's why I had asked the question, actually.
Yeah, the numbers are not overwhelming. If more families came in, we'd be easily able to, assist in that way.
Nice. So, anybody else?
We found a good source of information on limited English proficiency population in the region to be the adult education programs. There's Exeter, there's Portsmouth, there's Salem. And so that's certainly a place we can go to find out what they're experiencing in terms of new immigrant populations that are participating in ESL classes, for example.
Okay, David and Scott, updates.
Okay. I added the project updates memo to the website this morning. I can send it out via email after the meeting, of course. Just wanted to give a couple of quick updates since we have a little bit of time here on some of the sort of ongoing projects in the region. So the Seacoast Transportation Corridors Vulnerability Assessment, this is the project that has NOAA funding that we've been working on for the last couple of years. We're getting close to wrapping that up. I finished meeting with all the coastal communities that are experiencing direct impacts from sea level rise. So I had 6 of those meetings. I have a meeting next week with NHDOT to talk about our findings. And then really from there, it's just a matter of pulling it all together into a final report and getting that put together and published. That project ends in March, so we've got sort of a short time frame, and I'll be working a lot over the next 2 months or so to sort of get that done. the Hampton Falls 29610 project, which was a study of the US 1 through the center of Hampton Falls.
Yep.
That should be wrapping up very shortly with a final report. I know the consultant is in contact with the town to determine whether or not to do a separate public meeting on that, or just do a meeting as part of a select board meeting. And it looks like the findings from that study have basically come out that the town does not want to see Route 1 widened. So we need to look to other opportunities to try to manage the traffic through that area. And so not really a big surprise there, but it does give us some data and context to move forward with in terms of programming projects in our long range plan. So that's very much appreciated. The Seabrook Hampton Bridge replacement, we talked about that a little bit in the TIP amendment discussion. So that project is moving forward. The environmental assessment has been submitted to federal highways and the federal agencies for review and permitting. That review is expected to be completed in April of this spring. So in just a couple months here, and then they'll start to work on finalizing the design and addressing any mitigation needs at that point. And so that project again is moving forward a little more rapidly than had initially proposed, with the infusion of money from the IIJA. It allows that to go to all federal funds as opposed to a bonding process. The last one I want to touch on is the very last project on this memo, the annual list of obligated projects. This is a list of all projects which the Federal Highway Administration and Federal Transit Administration have committed funds to over the last fiscal year. We have to do that every year, and we publish it in December every year. So that was published this last December. And so you can view that. There's a link in the memo, and it's on our website, and it just talks about, you know, all the different projects that were in construction or finished or other stages of implementation in the region throughout the year. So Scott, I don't know if you want to touch on some of these others.
Yeah, a few updates for the New Hampshire Seacoast Greenway effort. We have 3 different work groups that are getting going. Well, one that has been working for a while, 2 that are just getting going now as part of the technical assistance grant that we have from the National Park Service Rivers, Trails, and Conservation Assistance Program. We've had Park Service staff working with one small group on the startup of the new nonprofit New Hampshire Seacoast Greenway Alliance. That'll be a regional nonprofit trail group that will be focused on fundraising for the trail, organizing volunteers that will work with communities on trail maintenance and general promotion and marketing of the trail. That work group, the nonprofit group, just incorporated last week. And is in the process of trying to get its IRS 501c3 nonprofit designation. The other 2 work groups, one of them is developing a signage plan for the Greenway, which is something that DOT is requiring as a prerequisite to be able to install any signage on the trail. So part of that will be developing that signage plan. Part of that group's work will also be working on interpretive signs that can be put up along the trail in various locations and getting community input on that. The third group is focused on community connections, working with town officials and volunteers from each of the corridor communities to identify what are the areas of town that towns want to see connected to the trail, whether downtown business districts or neighborhoods or parks or the beach. So gathering input from town officials, and then staff from the Park Service have actually lined up a group of landscape architects willing to do some pro bono work for us, who will facilitate a series of charrettes in communities along the corridor, looking at connections that are desired in those corridor communities. Another piece of news with the Greenway effort, we just found out that we'll have access to about $24,000 from an anonymous donor who's been in communication with the East Coast Greenway Alliance, and that's to be used for signage and amenities along the trail. Current timeline for the trail at this point is that the section from the Hampton, Northampton town line, north to Portsmouth, should go out for bid this fall of 22, and start construction in spring of 23, likely taking 2 construction seasons. There's additional drainage work that needs to be done in Hampton proper. DOT's expectation is that they need an extra year to get right-of-way lined up to allow that drainage work to happen, such that the 1.6 miles in Hampton likely wouldn't go to bid until fall of 23. But Mike Dugas's best estimate is that both segments could be completed by late 2024. So we should have our first completed 9.7 miles of trail by fall of 2024.
Scott, one question, if I may.
Shoot, Richard.
There's rumor control. I hate rumor control. That the towers that carry the wires across the trails route are going to be moved out farther in the marsh. Is that a possibility?
I had heard that through Sean Hansen in Hampton Falls, and my understanding is that the high voltage line in question is not the one that runs along the causeway, but rather one that is further out in the marsh. And so my understanding, at least, is that work does not impact the causeway.
Oh, it doesn't. Okay. All right.
From looking at the proposal that came to the town, unless I'm misinterpreting it, it was referencing wooden poles, and looking at the aerial photos, I can see another line. I can see another line that's not quite halfway between the causeway and the harbor bridge, but it's out across the marsh.
Okay.
Did do a presentation late fall to the Seabrook Hampton Estuary Alliance, or SHAE, about the marsh project, which is in the draft 10-year plan that's currently being considered by the legislature. Jennifer, I see you have a hand up.
I do. So we received a notice, I guess, on, well, this says today, but I'm pretty sure I got it yesterday, from McFarland Johnson, I guess, who is working for DOT. And they are saying that DOT is proposing improvements along 9.6 miles of the Foreman Hampton branch corridor, beginning at the southern terminus, about 1,000 feet north of Drakeside Road, and in Hampton, and continuing north-northeast to the north terminus at Barbary Lane in Portsmouth. So
Right.
To me, that's sort of the whole project. It's a little shy of Drakeside Road. And then they're asking us for all these different things, and then going to pretty much say that they're doing public informational meetings for the project in the near future. And then it says the project will be completed in 2 phases, with the first phase consisting of the 8.1 miles north of Hampton. The current advertising date for the northern segment is October 22nd. Are you aware, I mean, are they still trying to do designs and work concurrently and just separating the funding because of that drainage? Is that what the issue is?
So DOT has had McFarland Johnson under contract to do the environmental permitting piece for the whole 9.6 miles, and then have a separate contract with Greenman Peterson for the design piece. So I think that McFarland Johnson is proceeding with the full 9.6 miles on the environmental permitting side. I am not clear whether design work on the 1.6 miles in Hampton is proceeding right now in parallel with design work on the 8.1 miles from Northampton northward, or whether, since they know they're going to delay that a year for the right-of-way piece, whether they're sort of trying to push ahead as fast as they can with the 8.1 miles to get that out for bid this fall. And then once they have that ready, they would then turn their attention back to the design work in Hampton. I think the drainage issues in Hampton have just been more complicated than they understood going in. And
So
also the
Go ahead, sorry.
corridor really narrows there right behind Depot Land, or right behind Depot Square. And I think they found that in order to have a drainage structure they need, it would have to go on land owned by Foss.
So then that sort of summarizes a little bit of what we've been hearing from both sides, that one, the drainage design work more intensive, so needing more time to do it, and or potentially more funding, and then the right-of-way portion right there by Foss. What I'm not clear with is, it sounds like the design work, bid, and construction for everything north of Hampton is completely funded, and I'm left with not understanding what is actually funded for the Hampton piece.
My understanding is that the Hampton piece is also completely funded. We sat in on a meeting with DOT and Councilor Stevens where DOT presented the latest cost estimate from Greenman Peterson that I believe was to fund both the 8.1 miles and the 1.6 in Hampton. And Councilor Stevens, based on the strong turnout in support of the project at the hearing in Hampton, was fully supportive of the additional funding needed to complete the whole 9.6 miles, is my understanding. And so those funds are available now, and or will become available. So my understanding is that there is not a problem with funding availability for the 1.6 miles. It's more a problem with just needing extra time to work through that right-of-way process.
Okay, and I think that you have just nailed the missing piece that I was looking for. I know from that Hampton meeting, there was a lot of outcry, I mean, from other towns, but from Hampton, it was making sure that it doesn't get left and not done because it would need some extra funding. And then I just wasn't sure of the mechanism in which Councilor Stevens was able to make that money happen, like whether it was done through this TAP plan, whether it was done through some other plan, whether it was done through some, I have no clue what plan. I can barely keep up with what I have.
Well, I think it's the situation now that with the additional funding coming through ARP and IIJA, that there aren't quite the same funding constraints that, you know, that would have been the case 2 years ago.
That makes total sense. Thank you.
A couple other things quickly. I know we're coming up on 11. We've been working with the 5 other New England states on a grant to the Economic Development Administration, their tourism development program, for funding to install a network of permanent user counters on rail trails around the region. That would, the data from those counters would then be put up into a, interesting. Looks like the camera is pointing to the ceiling. Anyway, would feed into a regional data dashboard. So we would be the recipient for New Hampshire. We would in turn be working with Southern New Hampshire Planning Commission, Central New Hampshire Regional Planning Commission, and Upper Valley. And these counters would go on the Greenway on the Rockingham Recreation Trail running between Newfields and Manchester, and then on the Granite State Rail Trail running from Salem all the way up through Concord to Lebanon. So this would really be if funded, this would be a really nice step for us, because at this point, there's only one permanent trail counter in New Hampshire that's on the Nashua River Rail Trail. So it'd be a nice step towards having better data on bike ped usage. Age-friendly communities project is getting going. We've had 2 meetings of the regional steering committee, had our first meeting of one of the local steering committees last week in Hampstead, meeting with Exeter's local steering committee tomorrow, and the other communities to follow in the next several weeks. The 6 communities we're working with at this point are Exeter, Fremont, Hampton, Hampstead, Stratham, and Portsmouth. And then in year 2, we'll be soliciting for additional communities to take part. And then last bit, there are a number of bills in the legislature this year that relate to transportation that we're tracking. One of those, Senate Bill 437, would increase the amount that municipalities are enabled at their discretion to charge as a local vehicle registration fee, with proceeds to be used for transportation projects. Currently, municipalities can vote to charge up to $5. This would raise that ceiling to $15 at the discretion of local voters. HB 2022 is the vehicle for the 10-year plan, and we've already submitted testimony on that. HB 1432 would prohibit the use of state funds for new passenger rail projects. Not just the use of state funds, but would also prohibit the use of turnpike toll credits, which would essentially hamstring the Capitol Corridor. As far as we can tell, it would not impact the Downeaster, but we need to get some more information on that. And then also tracking Senate Bill 344 that deals with public meetings law and the ability of public bodies to meet remotely, such as we're doing here. There are a few other transportation bills that we're also keeping an eye on, but those are the ones that seem to have risen to the top in the discussion with RPC's Legislative Policy Committee. Happy to answer any questions about that, but that's what I have.
Scott, just a piece of from the chat. Please let Chris know to take his Newington books home.
The planning books, yep.
Okay.
I assume that came from Annette.
Possibly.
Yep. All right. Any other comments? I mean, we've hit 11 o'clock here, but if there's any other comments or any topics anybody wanted to bring up, we have a moment, take a moment and do that.
If anybody has any interest on a coast update, feel free to reach out to me. We have a lot of things going on. But I won't take your time here.
Brad, how about we schedule you for the next TAC meeting to give
Sure.
an update?
Sure, I'd be happy to.
And that would be February 24th. This is the next TAC meeting.
Yep.
We're going once, going twice. Now it's a little early for 1 o'clock. But do I hear anything for anybody?
Just a mention that you are free to close the meeting without a vote, and if we vote, we have to do a roll call. So just saying, as they say.
Correct.
All right. So I think Richard is going to adjourn the meeting.
Yes. That's the whole way to go.
All right. Thank you for coming, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks,
Have a
folks.
good day.
Bye.
Have a good day.
All right. Take care.
Jennifer, good question.
Scott.
Thank you for letting me be here, and I, as a member of the public, I will report to Annette to carry the books back.
Terrific. Can't remember the last time we had